I want to begin by saying that I'm not as sick as I sound. And so if you feel like moving closer, you're welcome to, but given the day and age, I totally understand why if you just want to expose only Tony to my germs, so I appreciate that as well. But so I want to thank all of you for coming here tonight and express to Mr. Clark, Mr. Bellitti, and MBK my gratitude for their willingness to again give me the chance to speak to you this evening and to share some of the thoughts that I have both with respect to the last year that has transpired since we last convened this event, as well as some thoughts on where we are headed as a school system. I want to acknowledge first the members of the Cambridge School Committee, as well as the members-elect who are here this evening, as well as members of the CPS caregiver community and the CPS leadership team who have joined us. The last time I had the pleasure to speak at this MBK event, the last time I had the opportunity to speak on this stage, which was not an MBK event, I was asked to describe my view on the role of the superintendent of schools. I said then, and I feel now, that an important part of this position is helping to facilitate a conversation about the role and direction of the public school system in our community. That conversation must play out across and among a multitude of constituencies in a wide array of forums, some very formal and public, and others much more discreetly, more narrow, and with fewer consequences, or fewer broad consequences at least. As superintendent, I think it is incumbent upon me to know when my own messaging needs to be explicit, assertive, and if necessary, loud. That is particularly important when fulfilling my responsibility to zealously advocate in the interests of students and on behalf of educators charged with preparing them for an increasingly competitive and complicated world. It is further my responsibility to know when to modulate my voice and message in deference to the community that it is our administration's honor to serve. Ultimately, the Cambridge Public Schools belong to the people of Cambridge. And I think one of the first rules of being an effective superintendent is being willing to communicate messages of, I'll say, varying levels of popularity, both internally and externally. This position is and needs to be an illustration of servant leadership. Questioning, prodding, and at times challenging the community to do better by its children is a core function of the role that I now hold. But at the end of the day, the city's children will be best served, or will be served, consistent with the community's values and expectations. As a proponent of the belief that public education should sit at the epicenter of all public policy, I welcome the responsibility to lend my voice to these values and to try to contribute to the establishment of systems that will put more students in better positions to succeed and consequently maximize their potential and post-secondary opportunities. This evening, in my conversation with Mr. Clark, I hope to articulate some of the ways in which I think we will be able to incorporate and apply our shared commitment to student interests in the months and years ahead. It is, I think, fair to say that we are not short on things to do, challenges to meet, or places where educators, caregivers, and students rightfully expect to see change in our school system. Like any enterprise looking to better position itself to advance its mission, we should work well to capitalize on what we are doing right and build upon that momentum to better position us for the future. To me, that includes, but is not limited to, continuing the work we have begun to align our K-8 curriculum so that we can eventually establish a necessary equilibrium between our programmatic investments and the need to empower educators like the professionals that they are to meet individualized needs of students. It means to ensure that all school communities effectively prioritize the establishment of social and emotional learning practices and programming as the foundation both of all learning, but also in an effort to cultivate an educational and professional atmosphere that is grounded in the expectation of psychological safety. We need to foster a professional culture in which employees genuinely feel valued and respected amid a political climate that is at times hostile to professional expertise, while at the same time bolstering the establishment of high expectations and accountability that we know are necessary if we are to ensure high academic standards for all students. At this particular time, our work demands that we be thoughtful, strategic, and prudent in our embrace of artificial intelligence. And if we are to ground ourselves in the notion that our embrace of AI must be rooted in a commitment to enhance rather than diminish students' educational capacity, we will need to take the time to fully understand the contours and ramifications of this phenomenon. And I think perhaps there is nothing we can do to genuinely enhance the value of how we as an organization serve students more than to ensure sound and efficient operational systems. The enormity of the financial investment that this community makes in our public school system warrants a commitment to the elevation of all standards, operational and academic. What that means is insisting on high standards with respect to the safety and environmental efficiency of facilities and the reliability and consistency of our transportation systems. Like virtually all school systems in Massachusetts, we are several contractual bidding cycles removed from anything that most of us would associate with a competitive bidding process. And yet those external factors are of no concern to families of students who have been habitually delivered late to school. If money alone could resolve these challenges, they would have been addressed a long time ago. What is needed is better execution on our part, and importantly, a willingness for our organization to absorb short-term discontent among some to better serve the interests of students at large. This could mean, among other operational changes, a willingness to address our highly unorthodox three-tier school start system to better buffer the transportation runs, and finally, at long last, deliver all students to school on time. Again, one thing we are not is short on things to do or places to improve. And at the same time, we should not lose sight of the fact that we are, in countless respects, a strong and steadily improving school system. Our teachers and school leaders are working tirelessly every day across each of our school communities to provide the children and young adults of Cambridge with a high-quality education. In many places and in many ways, they are succeeding, and we are indebted to them for their work. It is also true that we have legitimate and weighty challenges we need to confront, and we need to confront them with urgency. Whether it is the strategic decision about how best to utilize the building that formerly housed the Kennedy Longfellow at 158 Spring Street to best position more students for success, or identifying and more effectively communicating the invaluable and consequential role that the RISTA program plays in our flagship comprehensive high school CRLS, or collaborating with our city partners about how to maximize in a sustainable way the impact of the historic commitment to early childhood education by the Cambridge community through the Universal Preschool Program, or determining the future of the expanded learning time programs at the Fletcher Maynard Academy and the Martin Luther King Jr. schools. We definitely have a lot to do. As we set out on this work, I look forward with eagerness to beginning this role in the absence of an interim designation and in collaboration with the incoming school committee. To do so with a mindfulness of the historical context in which we will be serving. Like most school districts, we are a school system still on a journey toward a more equitable future. We have not historically realized the true vision of a public school system in which all students are met where they are and then supported to maximize their potential. Our standards have not always been, and at this moment are not yet, aligned with the high expectations that most of us believe are imperative to all students excelling. As a white male district leader in a city that I am still learning, I am far from the foremost authority on the anguish, frustration, and understandable indignation that this history evokes for many in our community. But to whatever extent I lack the firsthand experience of feeling the impact of these systemic injustices, I can say with all sincerity the genuine obligation I feel for voicing my objection to them and empowering those voices who have at times been diminished from their weight. I am grateful for the work of the Building Equity Bridges initiative that preceded the COVID disruptions and look forward to reporting back in the coming months about how our administration has worked to advance a multitude of work streams associated with that project and where, when necessary, we will reignite the level of urgency that has been described to me by multiple participants as palpable at the time CPS and all other school districts were knocked off course by world events. More than anything, I am committed to transparently and respectfully communicating the challenges that we face and the strategies that we will employ to meet them. To that end, I will continue to try to be as clear as I can be with respect to the singularity of our mission as a public school system, one that is both vastly complicated and profoundly simple. To provide a high-quality education to children. That is our mission. And it is my belief that there is nothing more consequential that we can do as a public school system to contribute to the creation of a more equitable world and to eliminate the scourge of the systemic injustices that have yielded opportunity gaps across generations than providing the best possible education we can to all students, and to ensure that race, ethnicity, disability, sexual orientation, religion, gender identity, economic status, nor any other irrelevant characteristic is ever a barrier to educational access. To do this, we will have to do some things differently. We will need to shift our culture from one that is focused primarily on adult preferences to steadfastly on children and their well-being. We will need to embrace a degree of accountability and organizational functionality that will feel uncomfortable for some for a time. We will need to enhance our relationships with families and foster more genuine and sturdy trust between school communities and caregivers. And we will have to do all of this with tremendous urgency. I am grateful and honored to have the chance to do this work on behalf of the children of Cambridge, and I am grateful to do it alongside the talented educators and our staff. And I am very grateful tonight to once again take questions from an individual who has much more of a history, much more knowledge, much more skill, much more talent, and probably better looking than me, our host tonight from MBK, Tony Clark. Thank you.
Thank you.
We've got to go up there.
My mother must have wrote the last line. You got it. I follow
Thank you.
My mic? Is the mic straight? Okay. Before I start, I wanted to obviously thank the superintendent. I know that we acknowledged a number of members from the school committee. I think Councilor McGovern is in the building, I believe so, right? Councilor McGovern. I'm sorry, I see.
This would have been easier down there.
Say again?
This would have been easier down there before we were under the lights.
Okay, the lights. But I really want to also thank Ty Belletti for putting this together. I want to be frank. I would just have these conversations with Ms. Pierce, quite frankly. I probably wouldn't be here tonight, but it was really Ty is the brainchild behind this. And so I'm excited that you're in conversation with us. And I want to thank you for your words. As you were speaking, it's interesting. I'm thinking, I see Gita from the Cambridge Community Foundation sitting next to Ty, and I can only think specifically, and Mark, help me out if I'm wrong with this, but in terms of in Cambridge, you have the greatest disparity of rich and poor in the Commonwealth. Is that correct? And when you think about the report, the Cambridge Community Foundation report, the equity and innovation specifically, if you haven't had the opportunity to look at the great work of Gita, Christina, and that team, it speaks to a number of things, particularly when you think about Cambridge. I think between 2019 to 2023, our median income based on the census was 126,000. The metro area is about 95,000, and Boston, Cambridge combined, it's about 100,000. However, in the report, it's very glaring that in terms of there is disparities, and you spoke to a number of them here. And not to kind of get into the weeds of it, but in terms of in understanding, you talk to the tier systems, that we have great disparities within our system, just socioeconomically, but obviously socioeconomically is connected to access. I was often, when I came in today, I had the opportunity, Miss Pierce, who's here, had asked me, how's my son doing? And the reality is, in terms of my son and people like my son, there's a wealth of resources. I can go to Mr. Pierce and go to a number of folks. But the fact that this report outlines a glaring perspective is that every person in this city doesn't have that social capital. I know we've talked about economic capital, but it looks at the social capital. So my question to you is, in terms of how do we make sure that we surround ourselves with the wealth of folks in this room to make sure that additional young people who may not have that social capital are set up for success within your school district?
Well, I think the first thing thank you for that question, Tony. I think the first thing I would say is that it's not just the one report that shows that there's evidence of these discrepancies. And we can look at this two different ways. On one hand, we can be traumatized by it because the gaps that exist within our school system are both pronounced and they are persistent. But another way of looking at it is that we know exactly what our challenge is.
Right.
That the consistency of the opportunity and achievement gaps that have been evident in the Cambridge Public Schools over an extended period of time should bring with it a degree of clarity with regard to what we have to prioritize and the challenges that we need to meet. I think that your question is essentially, how do we do that? And how is it that we realize what I would describe as the true vision of a public school system, meaning that wherever you are, whatever challenges you walk in the door with, we meet you as the student and we empower you to move forward. And I do think there are some specific tactical things and investments that we have made and that we need to continue to make. And I'm happy to speak to them with a degree of specificity tonight, but I think that I will say just from the starting point, because I think it has to be the foundation of everything else that we do, we have to have high expectations for all students. And high expectations requires real work. And where there are places where expectations have dipped, it requires a culture change, and all of that is difficult. And we should be honest about how difficult that is going to be if we're really going to move the needle and get to a place where we don't have another generations of leaders talking about this and students suffering from it.
You mentioned a generation of leaders. It's interesting. The last time actually I was on this stage, I think it was 1994.
That can't be true.
So it's just, definitely a while ago. And I specifically, the late, Charles Ogletree had a conversation around organization. And it seems though, in terms of where, I don't know, it was fascinating because it was like, how do you become organized within the midst of chaos? And so you had mentioned earlier in terms of how do we leverage, I like to say the incubation of the particular city. There's a number of players in here. And while there will be folks, I'm certain in your particular role, and certain the city manager and other particular folks who lead departments here will say, well, we have to be lean. We have to be more, more nimble with our budget. But when I look out in this audience, there are a number of folks who just want to do good work. Who are not, I think about Ms. Brethose and the wealth of knowledge she has and so many others who are here. I think about the folks who were over at MIT Lemelson who was like knocking on the door to get into the house, get into the schoolhouse. How do you kind of tap into individuals who are essentially saying, I don't want your money, but I want access to the young people to support this particular work? How do you create this particular ecosystem where folks don't feel as though, it's another superintendent, has a lot of ideas, we have a lot of initiatives in the city, but no one wants to hear me. While at the same time understanding we are pretty intrusive as well. So how do you walk us through? Because a lot of folks in Cambridge, everyone thinks they're a teacher. Everyone's an educator here.
Not me, I'm a lawyer.
Okay. Well, we'll get to that later. Right. How do you corral the village to essentially say, can you help me here? Can you help me there? Can you utilize those, these resources here? How do you do that?
I think I think there's a couple of questions that are embedded there. I mean, I think one of them is, how do you overcome the skepticism that people rightfully feel when they have been listening to, very similar talking points over an extended period of time?
Yeah.
And I think it's a challenging answer that is not always super well received, but because it takes time. But I think you show results. That I think you need to demonstrate that where effort has yielded productivity, and show that the thoughtfulness and strategies actually have the potential to make an impact. And I guess I'll say beyond potential, but actually are having an impact. I will say, I think that, and we've talked about this in some of the recent school committee meetings, is that we do have evidence of impact. We can show where investments that have been made by our school committee and execution that has been realized through our administrators have in fact yielded dividends, and that we shouldn't lose sight of those just because they're not at the order of magnitude that we want. So I think that there's sort of no better way to earn credibility than actually earning credibility, I guess, is the first thing that I would say. I think with respect to your question around how do we capitalize on the partnerships that are available to us as a school system, being uniquely situated as we are in a world-class city like Cambridge, I think that is in part where I believe that we have to improve our functionality as an organization. It's not the case that any educators in any of our school communities, any of our administrators don't want help, don't want support, and don't want partnerships. But the work that is before them is difficult. It is challenging. It is at times exhausting. None of that is an excuse for keeping our doors closed and not, as I said, capitalizing on where we are and the resources that are there. But it does require a more, I think, professional culture and better execution from leadership on down to make sure that the reciprocal dialogue that is necessary is there. And I say that not just because that improved professionalism will improve the quality of the partnerships that, and the receptiveness to partnerships that are experienced in the community, but because in the absence of that emphasis on the importance of execution, what you'll have, or what you could have potentially, is you will have robust partnerships that have a lot of enthusiasm behind them, but it's a little hard to track down the data to indicate that it's actually having a positive impact on students. And that is something that I think those of us in leadership have to take very seriously, because it wouldn't, there's a path toward creating a bunch of great partnerships, and we could have like a bunch of shiny brochures that show all the places that we're partnering. But if the quality of the educational experiences are not improving as a result of those partnerships, then I think there are like real questions that have to be asked about investment, the resources that are invested there, and it breeds more skepticism, which is why it's important that we not fall into that trap.
Awesome. You said the D word, data. I can only think about Member Hudson and some of the conversations that you guys have had during your meetings. And if you guys haven't tuned in to Tuesday nights, it's definitely a reality show worth watching. But one thing, what's interesting.
We have a new season coming.
Yeah, definitely. It is prime TV, all right? Ty often sends me the link, like, you got to catch it here, all right? So, I don't miss it. But one thing in terms of I really appreciate about the conversations during the committee, they have kind of helped me understand that we are sometimes we have a bunch of initiatives, but execution isn't there specifically. There was a conversation for some time around in terms of student success plans. And essentially many were under the assumption that this was a district-wide initiative. Obviously, if you watch the school committee meetings, we understand now it's particularly embedded at a particular school, I believe
Ridge Avenue.
Ridge Avenue, Upper School. And so when you think about these initiatives in terms of, we are very initiative-driven, sometimes implementation, is kind of wishy-washy. How do we scale this work, right? How do we scale this work and understand that, we're under the assumption of, because I know I went to some of those meetings myself early on. I was like, wow, this is going to be really cool. But what do you do to kind of build that trust in the community of like, we were expecting something to be scaled. Like every kid was going to, obviously it was advertised, every kid's going to get an adult that checks in with them. And now we're targeting one particular school and maybe one particular grade. So can you kind of speak to, how do you kind of help with that fatigue?
Yeah, I mean, so first, just as a quick background and context for the Student Success Planning Initiative that Member Weinstein in particular has advocated for and championed and supported the administration in our implementation of it. I would say that the first thing is, if any administrator ever shows up and says we're going to turn a key and implement something of this scale across the district, instantaneously, I would say that again should earn a degree of skepticism because it's not going to happen. I think that with respect to that specific initiative, I appreciate you raising it because it's very reflective of other challenges that we have had in other initiatives and other projects, which is that we're not short on initiatives and we're not short on projects, and there's oftentimes a lot of overlap that occurs between the various initiatives that's probably not unrelated to the frequency with which leaders have come and gone from the district. I think that one challenge often follows the other. Yeah. And so as a result of that, I take responsibility for attempting to focus the Student Success Planning Initiative specifically at Ridge Avenue Upper School, because we had leadership and a team willing to embrace the program. And I felt that by doing so in one building, we could eventually scale up. And I think that we can, but to do so, we're going to have to identify some of the other initiatives with very similar objectives. Yeah. And we're going to have to align our systems under sort of one umbrella approach. What I appreciate about the Student Success Planning Initiative and Member Weinstein, Nancy Tauber, other community leaders who have advocated for it, is that it is essentially adaptable enough where I think in time we'll be able to absorb some of these other work streams or workflows and have the type of scale that you are talking about and that was potentially promised previously. But it will take time, because if in the absence of doing that, it's going to essentially be trying to put a square peg in a round hole. And I don't think it will ultimately have the level of impact that it could.
I'm going to come back to that. But I want to talk to you. You mentioned data. Is there a particular, I guess it's a two-part question. Is there a data point that you're really excited about addressing? And is there a data point that you're really, you're really anxious about? Not as excited about. Right?
Well,
or you find daunting, if you may.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I'm not sure I've ever thought about it with quite that framing. What I would say is that the first thing is really important to note is that the data points that we're talking about are only valuable to the extent that they are evidence of student experience. Because there are all sorts of strategies and tactics that superintendents and principals and other leaders can use to develop the data points that they want to see. Right. Okay. And frequently, those data points are not sustainable, but those leaders have left before that becomes clear. And that is a thing that happens in K-12 education that we should not be oblivious of. In order to develop the data that we can truly be proud of and that can really, I think, help the community to see the Cambridge Public Schools in a different light than they currently do, rightfully so, I think we have to be thinking about changing systemic practices in a way that in time will yield data that we can be more proud of. In terms of the specific data points that I want to see, I mean, these are all things that if they're going to really have a meaningful impact, it has to be over time. And any of the type of opportunity achievement gaps that we've talked about are ones that, like, if they're still here in 10 years, then I would say I haven't done my job. But I'll throw it, because you asked for some specifics, I'll just give you one. We've got a chronic absenteeism problem at the high school. And that's one that we're going to be talking to some degree about it this coming week, actually, at the school committee meeting. But chronic absenteeism doesn't just happen. Chronic absenteeism happens when you've got some deficiencies in place and a culture that needs to be adjusted. I'm very grateful to the high school leadership team for their commitment, and that there are practices that they have put in place this year and policies that they have adjusted, not because of a mandate from me, but because they looked at the data and said, this can't continue. And I do think that that there will be benefits that we'll see as a result of that. So I guess I'm excited about that, and that I know that there's good work underway to change it already.
So how do you convert the folks in terms of like I think the folks in this room and obviously the folks who eventually watch it, we get it. And maybe we always don't agree, but we get it. But how do you essentially create, you talked about COVID earlier, and I think, and not that this was on your radar or it's under your watch as a superintendent or previously interim superintendent, but how do we capture those folks who we knew, at least we acknowledged at that particular point were invisible in our district during COVID? I mean, we talk oftentimes about race and stuff of that nature, but we know that there's a subgroup within our city who don't feel like they're welcome in our schools. And I don't necessarily mean physically, maybe emotionally. But how do you get those families to be a part of your administration?
I think you listen to them first and foremost, because they didn't just happen to become disengaged or disenfranchised. I mean, like, that it takes time for people to feel the level of alienation that in some cases exists. And I, in my experience, both in life and in work, like, that usually comes from a failure to listen to what people are saying and to understand their experiences. I think that one of the priorities that we've set for this school year that clearly will extend well beyond this year is to change as an organization how we value and how we prioritize family engagement, and essentially redefining it. And it's work that we spent a lot of time this summer on. I mean, there's all sorts of things that, frankly, I think need to be prioritized that, for a variety of reasons, and the way the start of the school year played out, we were not able to sort of lean into with the level of urgency that I would like. For better or worse, our need to improve our practices in the area of family engagement is so pronounced and so agreed upon. There's such a consensus that that's something that as an organization we don't do as well as we should, that we had the capacity as an administration to lean into that with the level of urgency that I think was warranted. And so we are, from both a strategic and tactical perspective, thinking differently about what we want the experience of parents and caregivers to be when they interact with their school community. Like any other systemic change, it will take time to, I think, really yield the benefits that we want it to. But I feel confident that it is something that, because of the strength of the consensus behind the need to do this work better, I think it's something that we are making improvements upon.
One of the things in terms of, so you spoke to family engagement. I'm just curious, you said we, is that we including high school principals, upper school principals, elementary principals?
Yeah.
What does that look like? Because, or is the we, the folks on Berkshire? Can you kind of...
The folks on Berkshire, if it's limited to the folks on Berkshire, and I know there's a number of our folks from Berkshire here today, and as the leader of Berkshire, I will say that we take great pride in the work that we do as a central administration. But the rule number one of being in the central administration is knowing that the real work in the school system happens in schools. Right. And so what folks in our community and folks in our organization should think of when they think of the Berkshire building, which is the headquarters of the central administration, for anybody who's unfamiliar with that. It's the old Thorndike. That was good Cambridge history by me.
Yeah, definitely. You got it. But
Thorndike
Thorndike was easier to get into.
That might be
Berkshire had a fort. Like, I don't know.
I never tried, so I don't know. But
yeah, I don't have that. That gold pass. I'm knocking on doors.
I think we have slightly fewer mice in Berkshire than we do in
pretty
Thorndike.
intense.
But my point is that as central administrators, our jobs exist for the sole purpose of supporting school communities. And so your question as to who do I mean when I say we are more community, or we have to improve our practice, I mean school communities. And there's no position in the organization more impactful or more consequential than that of the school leader. The 17 individuals who serve as our principals are the individuals, frankly, much more so than me, much more so than the school committee, much more so than just about anybody else, who as an individual position have the potential to have an outsized impact on the quality of the experiences that our students are having. And so yes, when I'm saying that, who do I set that expectation to? I certainly set it for my own team. I set it for the Berkshire building. But I hope the main example I set in the central office is that we have to support our school leaders so that they can be in a position to support their educators. And ultimately, I've said this before, but it's the idea of a sort of reverse deference,
Right.
and the idea that the closer you are to students, the more deference you should be afforded. At the same time, as I mentioned earlier, we also have to be a functioning organization, and that does require a degree of administration and supervision.
Just a follow-up in terms of, I think we all know that the work in which you're doing and your teams are doing is very high-stress work. And considering that you mentioned your 17 schools, 17 principals, what are you doing to support their psychological safety so that they don't harm anyone in their buildings or their families as well?
I hope modeling it is, I think, the first and foremost thing that you have to do. That I hope that there's never an administrator who feels as though that they can't come to myself or a member of our team with a problem.
Yeah.
And my sense is I think that is something that in the last year, I think our team, not myself specifically, but I think our team can take a degree of pride in that I think that our leaders do feel supported, and I think they understand the expectation that we have around building a positive professional culture that has a baseline of psychological safety, because you're just not going to get function. It doesn't matter if you're in public education or any other field. In the absence of psychological safety, nobody's going to do their best work. So I think that's critically important. That being said, I also feel like a responsibility to say that if we talk about our professional culture in Cambridge, in the Cambridge Public Schools, I don't know that I think the balance has always been, and I'm not sure it's a balance like an either or, but there's an equilibrium of sorts that has to be struck with regard to making sure that everyone feels respected, that their work is treated with dignity, that they feel valued, and that they are held accountable. And that we understand that we're not here just to make people feel safe and happy, that we are here to make sure students go from point A to point B, and point B has to position them for better post-secondary opportunities. And that's really hard work. It's work that is not always done with the same level of fidelity or skill that it needs to be. And as administrators, we have to be willing to hold staff accountable when it's appropriate. And I do not believe that this workplace or any other workplace is somehow incapable of striking that equilibrium. I think there's ample room to do that. And at the end of the day, we are a community made up of reasonable people, and it's striking that balance should not be some type of considered some type of outrageous aspiration. I think it's something we can do. I'm not saying it's something we have done perfectly in every place at every time, but it's something that we absolutely are capable of doing.
How do you strike the balance between 17 schools, 17 philosophies, but they're part of one district?
Yeah.
And I say that because talking to some families for tonight, you had some folks who felt like their schools do really great jobs with their students with IEPs and other needs of support, specifically speaking to that. And there were other families who were like, I'm in a particular system where I've been asked to sign an NDA, right? And so how do you strike that balance where we're in one district and it seems to be 17 different, and I'm not saying that as a pejorative, but you have 17 buildings, 17 folks. I mean, I always say in terms of to be a principal, and I say this respectfully, you have to have an ego of sorts, right? You have, that's not that the ego has to be unhealthy, but how do you strike that balance and keeping folks in line to the perspective we're all fighting on the same goal? And lastly, and create some norms and systems as we talked about, because if there's one family who's saying, I had this great experience with my particular school, and then some other folks who's like, I feel anxiety going into a particular meeting and I have to call on someone of your ilk, a lawyer, right? How do you strike that balance?
It's a good question. I told this story I think it was at a school committee meeting, but I had the experience on the first day of school this year of making the rounds to each of the 17 schools. And thankfully, some of them are co-located, so it's a little easier. But I had the experience of a parent who came up and introduced themselves to me, and they had a child at one school and a sibling was at another school. Right. And the description, the contrast in the description, I think was sincere. If there was any school community that I couldn't stand behind, then I frankly wouldn't have taken this job, and I would be much more vocal about it. But standing behind it and having a degree of confidence is very different than being able to attest to the extent to which each school community is thriving in all the ways that it needs to thrive. And this parent, let's say I think had us dead to rights in terms of describing the distinction in terms of those experiences. And it's something that has frankly really stayed with me since that conversation. Not that it was something I was oblivious to. I knew a few seconds into the conversation what the likely descriptors were going to be, and unfortunately I was right. And so I think that you talk about 17 different schools and not wanting 17 different cultures and 17 different systems that are completely distinct from one another. The reason that we can't have that, the reason that we have to have a degree of alignment and that the district has to have a consistent set of expectations is that amidst the inconsistencies come the diminishment of standards and expectations. That when you are not having a degree of alignment across individual school communities, it is inevitable, and I think there's enormous amount of data that attests to this in all sorts of school districts, suburban, urban, rural, everywhere else, that you will see a decline to some degree or another in the standards to which students and educators are held. And so for that reason, alignment is necessary. At the same time, whether you're a school district like Boston with 100 and, I'm not sure what number they're using this week, but we'll say 120, or us with 17 schools, you have to recognize that, like I said earlier, the work happens at the school, which means that each school is going to be, to one degree or another, an ecosystem unto itself. And you've got to give school leaders and educators the space to feel that level of autonomy to which they are entitled as a distinct school community. But the example you used about the IEP process, there shouldn't be a lot of difference, not just across schools, but across school districts. Right. That's a highly regulated process that, if done right, includes both the necessary level of humanity that is needed in that context, but also sets clear expectations for the staff that are administering the process and the students and family who are participating in it.
How many different type of report cards do you guys have?
At the moment?
At the moment.
Too many.
Yeah, and so when you think of that, and we think about, you mentioned earlier providing students with a post-secondary experience, mm-hmm. And I get it. I think some narratives, some numbers, I think all of those things are great, but how do we become, maybe it's something that we have to get on, on the ballot or something, right? But how do we make sure in terms of we understand that if, I'm at Mr. Murphy's school and in elementary school, then I'm off to Mr. Barnes' school in middle school, that there's some clarity, because I believe they're clusters, right? They go in clusters. So how do they reconcile, this one report card looks like this, other report card looks like this, and we're placing students where they need to go, right? We're in good faith, but how do we do that?
Well, I think the first thing is you don't do it all at once.
Yeah.
So I'll just use the report card example that you cited to. This coming marking period, which will be in early December, will be the first time that all of our core content areas are assessed using a standards-based approach across all schools. So starting in December, for core content areas, you will have one elementary school mm-hmm. report card system that will be aligned across all school communities. Right. And I think that's necessary because, again, for the sort of downstream implications that I talked to earlier, but also just from a basic family communications perspective, you're going to have it's not so much that, most families don't have siblings in different schools. Some do, like the one I mentioned earlier. But it's not so much that, you don't understand what's being said. It's that the quality of what is being communicated via those report card is not going to stay at the level that we want it to if we don't have that type of consistency, which is why we've made that change. And elementary families received a communication from me last week saying that, and I'm really glad they did now that you asked, mm-hmm. That we were going to, in terms of core content areas, we will make that switch effective this year and this term to a standards-based approach. For some schools, that's going to be a relatively modest change. For others, it'll look a little different. For our special content areas, PE, art, music, technology, library, we don't yet have, this is a more complicated topic in terms of alignment of school schedules, but we don't have a distinction across what's being offered at each school, and we're not ready to make the transition to a more consistent standards-based approach, so that will remain as it has in the past. But the core content areas and the frequency of the issuance of report cards will become consistent and aligned effective this year with 3 report card periods. So my point in saying all that is you asked, well, how do we get to a place of greater consistency? And I would say that we insist on consistency when consistency is what's best for students. We allow schools to act in a more autonomous fashion when that's what's best for students. And we understand that there's no shame in incremental progress from time to time.
Incremental.
With respect to report cards, I would say this is a big increment to get just the core content areas, but that slow and steady sometimes wins the race.
And I want to ask you a question, and if this is more under the purview of maybe posing it to school committee members, please just feel free to let me know. But one thing I'm always curious, you talked about alignment a great deal. There are a number of institutions, they may be charter, in our community that are doing some really good work, at least from a numerical standpoint. You know,
I think a variety of ways.
In variety, but school climate, a number of things, right? What is, has there been any kind of excitement or even kind of interest in maybe bringing folks to kind of look at some of those buildings, spend some time with there, kind of taking on some practice and some interchange? And I know that sometimes, you know, some words in Cambridge are like a slur, but I think that there are opportunities to look at other places to essentially say, how can we get better? In addition to that, I know that there are communities that look like ours. I know, you know, Ty's probably going to get annoyed. I tell you all the time, like a Shaker Heights, Ohio, a Berkeley, California, a Montclair, or Ann Arbor, places that have institutions and you know, industry that kind of look similar, maybe not Montclair, but they also have institutes where you have the Montclair State University that works for, you know, with things like these particular success plans. Like, have we looked at other communities? Not that we have to get on a plane and go spend money there, and essentially said that look like us from a demographic standpoint, right? But also from a socioeconomic standpoint, say they're doing this well. They may be not doing this so well, but what can we do a little bit differently? Have we done that?
I think we have, and I think we can do more of it. And I think that our high school team had the opportunity to visit multiple schools last year, both with respect to some operational observations that they were making, but also there are examples of schools, and this is an issue that, you know, sort of somewhat close to my heart because it's just some of the areas that, excuse me, I've had the opportunity to work. Their flagship, excuse me.
You some water?
I think I can get through this answer without a water break. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Sorry. So there are a lot of good examples in Massachusetts of comprehensive high schools that are specifically designed to incorporate their career and technical educational programming into their building, into their instructional plan, into their schedule, into everything else. And we have gone out and observed those. I mean, and Principal Gahant in particular is very good about connecting with cohorts of school leaders, about making sure that we are constantly listening to what we can do better and not presuming, because of some of the other advantages that we have that are not attributable to the public school system, frankly, that we are somehow doing it better. So I think my answer to your question is we have done that, but I absolutely agree that we have to do more of it, and I think we have to do more of it at in the K-8 area as well. I think we have a lot to learn, both from neighboring communities as you suggest with similar demographic profiles. And I think it just sort of speaks to our need to potentially, as an organization, improve our listening capacity, which is, I think, something that I'd agree it needs to be a goal of ours.
You want to get some water?
Yeah, but ask another lengthy question.
A lengthy?
Yeah, please.
No, one other thing, and someone can fact check me. I think it was in 2014, former President Obama spoke at Worcester Tech High School. And in this particular speech, and as I said, someone can Google it and just fact check it. But in this particular speech, I remember, he spoke to, obviously, the principal was very revered, but the work in which he did, I think she maybe went on to be the superintendent of the district or something. It
doesn't necessarily mean she.
Yeah, it doesn't know. But
a lot of people end up as superintendent, you know.
I know, right? We just, But nonetheless, in this particular speech, he spoke to in terms of how you leverage university and other particular parties in that particular community. And obviously, he was talking to WPI and Holy Cross and Clark in that particular perspective. And I know we talk about it all the time, and I want to be careful and with the expectation that you're going to get Harvard and MIT, to act a certain way. But in terms of not just Harvard, MIT, Leslie, but the startups in here, the Lemelsons, and how do you kind of tap into the genius of the Cambridge Community Foundation, work with, I see Ellen's here, Ellen Seminoff and her crew, but also kind of talking to folks who may have been in different particular roles. Ms. Pierce is here and other particular, Ms. Breffos. How do you tap into these folks? Because the particular speech, and obviously the speech was probably written by several folks, but it was very specific around in terms of you have an abundance of resources within this particular Worcester area to help to be a driver of this particular community. And maybe a couple years later, as you know, UMass has that big hospital out there in Worcester, and they do a really great job of funneling Worcester Tech students into these particular programs. So when you think about RISTA specifically, how do you envision RISTA taking advantage of this economy? Even though some folks will say, well, we're in tough times, but we're here to work with you to get those young people and to set up for success. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I would say a couple of things about that. I mean, one, there's no question that a variable that distinguishes us from virtually every other school system are the resources that we are surrounded by. There really isn't another example of a public school system surrounded by the wealth of educational, institutional resources that we have. And so I appreciate you sort of like level setting in terms of expectations, but I think that it should be an expectation from the community that I will be able to, that I will help and contribute to the building of stronger partnerships with those institutions. I don't think there's any question about that. And I think that's for RISTA and across our entire school system. And I will say that in my conversations over the course of the last year plus, each of those institutions, Leslie, MIT, Harvard, and countless others, have been eager and excited and enthusiastic about partnering with us and helping to advance the needs of our students. Again, it's not just that other communities don't have the institutions around them the way that we do. I will say that having been in some of these other communities, those institutions are either not always as eager or they're not always as equipped to support a public school system. So I think those are reasonable expectations, and I think that's dialogue that myself and our team need to engage in. I think with regard to RISTA specifically, what I would say is, I think there are some fundamental questions that need to be addressed with respect to the role of RISTA in CRLS. And I think that that's going to require some real community dialogue to help better position the RISTA program, CRLS as a flagship school, a comprehensive high school, and our community to understand the inherent advantages that we have as a school system for having a comprehensive high school and the successful programs that we have in RISTA. I always feel a little presumptuous as a relative newcomer to Cambridge saying that there seems to be a misunderstanding here or a gap in understanding or communication. But I will say I think this is one that I have experienced and heard enough about that I feel somewhat confident in my diagnosis that there is a misunderstanding as to what RISTA is and what RISTA has the potential to be. That RISTA is not just a set of shops for students who don't want to go to college. It absolutely can be an opportunity for post-secondary education, career, and success for students who are not bound for a four-year college. It absolutely is that, and we should take pride in that, and we should invest in that, and we should support our students for whom that's an appropriate pathway. But it is more than that. It is a component of our comprehensive high school that, statistically speaking, is the most likely program to best position students of all sorts of different backgrounds, with all sorts of different career and post-secondary objectives for success, because Chapter 74 program, which is the sort of like insider description of career and technical education and pathways exploration, is the type of programming most likely to deeply and meaningfully engage students. And so we have to start lifting that up and celebrating that as something that our community should be not just taking great pride in, but be taking greater advantage of. And so what my message would be to those outside partners is that we as a school system understand the jewel that we have in RISTA, and that we're going to make the appropriate types of investment. And I'm not just talking about financial investment, I'm talking about investments of time, investments of structuring the school properly so that students can take advantage of it, making sure that more students have the opportunity to be exposed to the programming. Our committee members here have sort of heard me beat the drum before over the fact that we have a percentage of students that are participating in Tech Explore that is only acceptable if you don't understand what Tech Explore has the potential to be. Mm-hmm. And so we have to start thinking differently about what this program can offer, and not thinking in sort of an antiquated, siloed fashion around, we keep the academics over here in this room and we keep the vocational work over here in this room. That's an antiquated way of looking at the opportunities that RISTA represents.
As you're speaking, I have a question that may be more also opinion, which I don't want to try to inject too often. As you're talking about, let's take RISTA specifically, and I'm thinking about partners, and I think that in terms of, for me at least, as a partner in this particular community, it's important that I'm led a little bit. Yep. And so when we think about these potential partners, are we going, you talked earlier in your opening words about AI, for example. Yep. But are we going to maybe, the School of Education, essentially like, can you help me draft a white paper on the parenting in Cambridge? Can we put together a group of maybe 50 parents where we're working with from the upper school to the high school so they can talk about their various experiences? Are we looking at the Sloan School over at MIT and essentially saying, we know that there are grave disparities in fundraising efforts, particularly with their particular school-based organizations? Can you help School A raise funds that are similar to maybe School C? So in terms of like, what does that look like, but specific? So I'm thinking about that in terms of, how we lead partners, but particularly when we think about all the things you spoke to about the emerging economies and the nuances that are coming with them, how are we maybe leveraging the universities to essentially make the argument to what you're saying about Arista, like we can get to that next level. We can be, the exemplar in the nation. How can we leverage those community partners? Or are they even partners yet?
Well, I think that they're fledgling partners, I guess, to some extent, right? Like, I think we've got to have more robust dialogue, and I think probably articulate in a clearer fashion what it is that we need as a school system. I think you correctly identified it, that like partners from a school system, when the partnership is functioning properly, want to hear from the school system as to what our needs are. Sure. Like if we're not the experts in what our students need, and clearly that expertise has to be grounded in the type of reciprocal dialogue that I talked about earlier between caregivers and the school system. But for outside partners, I think it's reasonable for them to expect us to be able to articulate, this is what our students need to have an improved experience and to be positioned well for success. So I think just being really clear with that and communicating more effectively. But I would say that when you were talking, I think I sort of see a very clear through line between what I spoke to earlier about the need for us as an institution to improve our capacity for engaging with families, and the need for our community to understand what RISTA represents in the 21st century. And where I think that manifests itself is, I would say how it manifests itself if it's working well is there's greater understanding on the part of families the opportunities that RISTA represents and how their child, regardless of whether they're going to go on to a formal post-secondary education or not, or whether they're interested in a career pathway. And to be clear, everybody needs more education post-secondary. Whether you go to a formal 4-year, 2-year, a training program, like we all need. I graduated from high school 25 years ago, and I still need a lot more education. So like, we shouldn't think of it as like education and not education, but we should think about those types of post-secondary pathways and making sure that families are fully informed and have the agency to advocate for their children, and their children are well positioned to make those types of decisions that can put them on a trajectory toward a fulfilling and an engaging career and life. And I think that those two things are very much related.
You used the word I really loved, agency. So kind of, you can look at the high school or you can look at other particular measures. But one of the things, however, when you looked at agency, there are a number of families who may have the skill sets, may not have the skill sets, but it's the agency to help to really begin to eradicate the achievement disparities.
Yep.
So when you think about our gaps, right, in terms of what is we all have timelines, but what is a measurable timeline to really put a dent into? I know we're doing it, and and how do we do that? I know one of the things, I think, you correct me if I'm wrong, Councilman McGovern put forth a proposal to open up youth centers on weekends, right? And I think there was a time when there were conversations, and Ty can correct me, where there were folks, not from your previous administration, were like, can we utilize your space on weekends for what's that kind of the direct tutoring with that particular?
Excel tutoring, yeah.
Yeah, the tutoring. So how do we essentially address the fact that in terms of we have to maybe approach it in a radical space, a radical approach to address the fact that in terms of we have to catch up. I know we used the word incremental earlier, but how do we have a radical shift and understanding that we don't have a lot of time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, first I would say incremental is fine when it's paired with sustainability.
Yeah.
Right? I don't think we should take, as I said, I don't think there's shame in incremental progress as long as it's sustainable and meaningful.
Right.
And it's continued, obviously. In terms of what is a timeline for which we see all of this, I mean, I think I don't know that I have an answer for, in the absence of sort of specific benchmarks, what I think is appropriate to do at what timeline. But what I would say is that every strategic objective has to have a timeline attached to it.
Right.
That any goal, that the measurability of the progress is sort of like out there in the air and not tied to something more concrete, I think is necessary. But I also want to acknowledge that there's a tension there, because I'm not interested in progress that sort of produces a bunch of impressive data points, but does not change the underlying conditions. That is what is in fact yielding the data points that we want to see changed. And so I would commit to a timeline attached to each goal, but I can't tell you that, everything that we imagine that we want to see changed will be changed in the next, 36 months, because I think that some of these challenges are much more deeply systemic, and it will take time to sort of unwind the conditions that have produced them in the first place.
So, and staying there, in terms of the conditions, what have you found kind of in your time here? And you're no longer new to this community, you're the superintendent.
Right.
What are some of the root causes as to why? I mean, it's not you. I want to just be fair to you, is that you're inheriting a legacy of kind of moving the goalposts. It's like, and this is me talking, this is not Ty, blame this on me, but I think sometimes it's a community of really, really great ideas, but really poor execution. It's like we are idea rich, organization poor. The organization doesn't seem to mesh. And I think it's a lot of really good intentions, and that's not to say anyone is a bad person, but in terms of how do we kind of have a conversation and say, there are root causes as to, so for example, I know people who have had really bad experiences with their experiences with CPS, but then when you kind of pull back the veil, their parents had really bad experiences, and in some cases their grandparents had a bad experience. So it's inherently just some root causes, but then at the same time, you start to pull back and say, what did you do or not do?
Sure.
To kind of help that. So how do you kind of, that tension, that creative tension of understanding that there are core root causes to these issues that you're inheriting, but at the same time trying to, rally the troops? Yeah,
I mean, I would say that it's a broad identification of challenges, so I'm going to respond with a broad sort of hypothesis with respect to causes. So keep in mind that any of us could sort of find an illustration that does not necessarily have the sort of, point-to-point,
Sure.
relevance. But I think, in my experience, and as you said correctly, I've been here for some time now.
Yeah.
It's gone by quick, but I think it is fair to say that more so than other school systems, we have a culture that has been focused on adult interests over student interests. I think that's a reality. I think if we're not transparent about that, if we don't sort of like hold up a mirror to us and say, this is a place that has not always prioritized kids in the way that they need to be prioritized in order to overcome all of the other challenges that society and the world are going to lay at our feet. That is something that has to change. We have to be a more student-focused culture. And what I say to our administrators frequently, and I hope that they're hearing me, and I'm gonna, because they're going to keep hearing it at least for a little while, is that culture is the sum product of our day-to-day interactions. Every single thing that we do, every email that we send, every interaction we have with a student, every interaction we have with an adult, every small decision that we make at various levels of the organization to our larger decisions as to what we say we're going to prioritize and invest our resources in, all of that contributes to culture. And I think cumulatively, the Cambridge Public Schools has suffered from an adult-focused culture from what seems, in my view, to be an extended period of time. In addition to that, and not unrelated to that, I do think that from a teaching and learning perspective, we have not always adhered to high expectations across the board for all students in all school communities to the extent that we need to. I'll give you my third extremely overly broad cause, understanding that you've asked me to identify the causes to a broad set of challenges, right? We have a sprawling organization. We have a lot of schools. We have a lot of people. We have a lot of tasks. We have a lot of initiatives. We have a lot of projects. There is a lot. And I think at times we have not necessarily, as best as we could, focused on our singular mission of improving the experience that students have in our schools so as to position them for post-secondary success. That I think there are times that we try to take on with good intentions, and you said that, you talked about good intentions. Very few people get into this work without good intentions. Mm-hmm. Like, it's a field that attracts, is part of why I really enjoy working in it. It's why I enjoy working with educators. It attracts people that have a sense of right and wrong and have values that they want to live out on a day-to-day basis. So we've got a surplus of good intentions, and I'm glad that we do. I'm genuinely grateful for that. But sometimes that can result in a focus on intentions and not necessarily a focus on impact. And that can serve as an organizational distraction at times. So those are three buckets that I would say culturally we have to do better if we want to see different results.
I love what you said, and I'm not going to get caught up in the minutia of the union and how do you get rid of bad folks, but I will ask in terms of if we know that there are some adults, my grandfather once said in terms of, yes, be careful in dealing how you navigate law enforcement, but you also could be harmed in school as well. Like, there's a harm that can happen in school. And so when you understand, not that you have every particular child, every particular case, understanding that there may be some harm happening in these schoolhouses, right? The psychological harm specifically. How do we protect? Because, I'll give you an example. In my other life, I work over at Bunker Hill Community College. And every year I kind of get a sense of how many students are CLS graduates and how many are not. And not to, I think this particular semester, it's about 16 throughout the classes. And there was one particular student yesterday, and I don't know if I may have told Ty this story. I definitely went home and said the story. And the student is a CLS graduate. And as you know, Monday was November 10th, right? Mm-hmm. Yesterday was November 11th. This was the first day I saw the student this semester. And I was like, where you been? and I've been emailing, and he's like, well, I just was stressed out. And he's like, in high school, if I was stressed out, I was allowed to take a walk. And I was like, that's a hell of a walk. It's been, a 2-month walk, right? And one thing that I get a lot, and this is not to, place a blanketed statement on CRLS students, but a lot of the students that I've had, and I've been there 16 years, oftentimes is this level of, in terms of like this hand holding. It's hand holding, and I'm not to say holding hands is a bad thing, but how do we provide our young people with the agency that they're not coddled, while at the same time, that coddling could also be skewed as like very low expectations. So,
well, I don't think it's skewed. I think that's, coddling is low expectations, just to be clear. And I said earlier that I think the foundation of all learning and the foundation of all healthy workplaces from a school's perspective is a solid foundation of social and emotional learning. That making sure that our educators are prioritizing it, are doing it, and are supported and equipped to do it and to do it well. I believe that. I don't think you're going to have educators working at their best if they don't feel that level of psychological safety. And I know with certainty you won't have students who are learning and maximizing their capacity if they are if they don't feel that level of psychological safety. But that there's a long distance between what I just said and coddling. And so if there are instances, and I know that you're right, I know that I think that we do have situations where I've never heard of anyone, going out in the hallway to take a breath is one thing, taking a 2-month walk is kind of a different order of magnitude. But like, I think that we have to have greater accountability with respect to that. And I think we have to ultimately hold our students to higher expectations. I think what's really important to note is that it's not binary, that it is not the case that like you can never allow a student to go outside and take a walk, and it's not the case that like walks are somehow forbidden in CRLS. What it comes down to, as you've said, is about the execution. And I can't say that some of the, as we improve some of our systemic practices, might there be, in the short term, a student who is coddled or a student who is not supported to the extent that they need to? I think when you're dealing with 7,000 students every day, there's a likelihood that we will not be perfect. But there's a long distance between where we are and where we need to be, one. And two, the vision of public education is that we do strive for perfection, and we do strive to make sure that we strike the right balance, and that students are both supported but also properly prepared. And you cannot be properly prepared for life if you're being coddled. And I think most educators would agree with that.
So when we think about that, and I see that, I know you didn't come up here just to tell us that. We got a couple more minutes. But one of the things that I have found, and obviously I want to really thank you and your team, and I just want to give some context. When Superintendent Murphy reached out about this particular conversation, I know we haven't talked at all about the questions. He said, ask me whatever you want. I want to thank his team for setting this up. And so one of the things, I say that because I know that we are just one organization of many. So I would encourage you guys to approach his team and please thank you for your work. And just kind of to have these conversations. And I know that I have a little bit more time, but I'm really fascinated about a myriad of things. But there have been a lot of conversations. I think one thing that been interested really around this idea of the achievement gap. What's fascinating to me is because one week at the school committee meetings, we call it the achievement gap. Another week, we call it the opportunity gap. Another week, sometimes we call it an access gap. When you play alphabet soup like that, can you really address anything? I mean, or is this just kind of, not to put on you, but it becomes like this cosmetic exercise where it's like, what are we shooting at? So like, how do we keep in mind that the reality is, to your point, I think we have low expectations for maybe one group of students. We may not have it so much for the other group. But so how do we address the fact that in terms of when we look at the numbers on the scoreboard, we're not doing as well with one particular subgroup or the other for whatever reason? Yep. How do we begin to address that?
Well, with respect to the alphabet soup, I think the important word there is the gaps. I think you can put whatever qualifier you want. The point is, we're not doing as right by our students of color as we are our white students. Like, end of statement. That has to change. How does it change? I think being as transparent as we can about it, so that we are raising the expectations that the community has for us as a school system, I think is one important piece of it. So I do think that communication is always a fundamental aspect to it. I think that understanding, when I said earlier about the work happens in schools, I'm not just sort of paying lip service to the building-based staff. What I'm saying is that, like, the most consequential work that happens is not happening at Berkshire Street. It happens in individual school communities. And so we have to be in those school communities and making sure that whatever systems are necessary to maximize the potential impact we have, that we are doing that. Oftentimes, maybe more oftentimes, that comes by way of support. That if there are situations that are disruptive, that if there are situations that operational or otherwise that are not creating an environment that is conducive to high quality teaching and learning, then we as a central office have the responsibility to address that. But in addition to the support, which I think is, again, most of the interactions between a district and a school should be in a supportive posture, there absolutely does have to be an accountability component too. Because in the absence of that, especially in a school system that is as at least complicated, if not large, we're good sized and complicated. Right. You will have the variability. The variability will breed low expectations. I don't think that's a Cambridge Public Schools factor. I think that's a fact of life, and we have to make sure that we're empowering school communities to do right by students, and at the same time setting certain standards that make clear what our expectations are as a community as to what happens in those buildings and how students are treated and supported.
Maggie, 5 more minutes? Okay, a couple questions. They're kind of quick.
That's Lily, but Maggie sends her best too.
Lily's great.
Lily is great. And Maggie's great too. They're both great.
They both are great. Thank you to both. Thank you both, Lily and Maggie. Really quick, I've got a couple quick questions. So when you think about, a lot of times, at least I know that I get caught up in, I start talking a lot about the high school.
Yep.
And I want to go back to elementary. If you could kind of speak to, I want to just do 2 and 2 and 2. And what are 2 things you're excited, one thing you're excited about at the elementary level, and one thing you're most concerned, and then do that for the upper and then the high school as well. And,
okay.
Yeah.
I'm excited that we will have, at least in the core content areas, aligned standards with respect to our report cards, and that families will have clearer communication as to how their students are progressing, what the expectations are, and critically important, what they can do to help support their students in the meeting of those expectations. What I'm most concerned about at the elementary school level, and this is a bit of a horse race, so don't hold me to this.
No worries.
Anybody else here, please don't hold me to this. There's a lot of variability. How do I want to answer this one? I am concerned about the fact that I'm concerned about the fact we have a lot of variability with regard to how our schedules are operating.
Yep.
And I want to make sure that each of that the utilization of time within our elementary schools is such that we're maximizing the potential of every minute of every day. I'll leave it at that for now, but I promise you it'll be an issue that we'll be revisiting in one form or another. Upper school, our team, as part of the sort of ongoing effort to improve the capacity of our institution around engaging with families, is starting a series of caregiver academies that have been for a long time advocated for by a number of caregivers in the community, and I'm extremely grateful to them for their advocacy, and I'm grateful to our school leaders for coming together in coordination with some of our central office leaders to set up what I think has the potential to be a series of programs starting in December and going throughout the course of the year to help engage families to both to give them the information they need to support their students, but also to solicit from families what they need from us in order to better support their kids. What I'm most concerned about on the upper schools, our upper school model in terms of the structure of our upper schools, I think is of questionable sustainability. Year in and year out, we are essentially keeping our fingers crossed and using all the Scotch tape and glue at our disposal to keep our schools, the structural class size, grade level size aspects of our upper school model intact, and I don't know how long we can continue to engage in the practices that we have.
With the high school, I want to go I want to go a couple different ways with this. I would like you to talk about the extension,
Yep.
the main campus, and the Rista. If you could kind of two,
Yeah.
the same thing with each one of them.
Sure. I'll start with the high school extension program if I could.
Please.
Low-hanging fruit problem is that we need to name the program and not have it continue to
Yeah.
be referred to by an acronym. But aside from that, I think that HSEP provides an invaluable opportunity for students who need an alternative high school pathway. Any district of our size has to take alt-ed seriously and make sure that we are providing a program that is going to meet students where they are, and provide for them both the secondary opportunities that they need, but also really position them well for post-secondary success. I have a lot of, I just as superintendent now, and I think you as a community should take enormous pride, excuse me, in the work that's taking place in that building. I'm not referring to the work on the roof, that's a different story, but the work that's actually happening in the classrooms in that building. And I think it's a very strong program. What it's not is a program that is seamlessly integrated into our upper school model. And I'm not saying that we need to replicate HSEP specifically across our upper schools, but we have not necessarily built the type of on-ramp that could, I think, in turn, provide some alt-ed educational opportunities for students, as well as some potentially better therapeutic learning opportunities for students, if we were thinking more holistically about it.
Right.
And so I think that's something that we have to take a slightly broader view on in the months and years ahead. Sorry. And you went to the high school?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think Rista, what I'm most excited about, I think I've already answered that with respect to the Rista program and the opportunities that represents. What I'm most concerned about is, I would say that, what I said earlier about the need for some professional culture adjustments, as our largest school and as our flagship school, they're not, not counted in that. I think they represent they as a school community represent a place where I think we have to think long and hard about being a student-focused culture. We have tremendous educators there. They work very hard. I think Principal Gately Gahant has brought a lot of skill and acumen to that role in ways that I think he and his team can really have a positive impact. But I do think there's some professional culture adjustments that I think I'd be being disingenuous if I didn't say that I think are necessary. That's true across the district, but again, you occupy a third of the district, it's going to be true for you too. And I think in addition to that, I think that we've got a learning community, a student schedule, an administrative structure, a relationship, a dynamic between CRLS and Rista, all of which sort of came into existence during a different period in our community's history, in the district's history, and in the world's history. And I think that I don't have a specific prescription that I want to show up and say, I want you to do X, Y, and Z differently. But I would say that as an institution, the high school has to be willing to take a fresh look at exactly how we're serving students and whether or not there are structural changes that would better position us to serve students. Okay. I was trying to get.
Okay. I got a couple quick ones. And I do see Councilor Bernhardt as well. He's here as well. So I want to acknowledge some folks. So thank you for being here. I see your hand. Give me a moment. But one of the things you mentioned a great deal of, you mentioned the word excellence. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit? Well, you said high standards. How do we kind of define what does that look like under your administration?
I think it means that, and I don't know that this is a novel definition, so I don't want to claim any degree of creativity necessarily, but like the most fundamental aspect of a public education is our doors are open to whomever lives in the community.
Sure.
We're going to meet you where you are, and we're going to maximize your potential. And I think that I've told this story before, but I had the opportunity to be involved in a strategic planning process once where the debate in how to develop a new mission statement for the district was over a line that said, our mission is to help students reach their potential.
Sure.
And I think the critical change that that group that I was involved in made was that the verbiage was changed from to reach their potential to maximize their potential. Mm-hmm. Because students do not walk in the door of a public school with a defined potential. Their potential is determined by the degree to which we support them and shepherd them toward a better future. And so I would define success by being a school system in which students' potential is maximized rather than reached.
Sure. I have a last question. I know there's some folks in here. You can stick around for a little bit, and so you guys can tap them. And so one of the things, I mean, as we know, we had a recent election. I believe there's 3 new members on the school committee. Is that correct?
Last I checked. But.
Yeah. How do you? I mean, obviously, how do you navigate the fact that in terms of 3 members of this particular new committee, although some have mentioned support, did not vote for you to become the permanent superintendent? Like, what is that? Not that it's a bad thing, but in terms of the opportunity to work with these new folks and this kind of, I would assume, fresh perspectives.
Well, I mean, I would say a couple of things. And I think that the people who are leaving the school committee, I hope they know that I'm not trying to ingratiate myself because,
Right. No, it's not a bad thing.
The committee that both the committee, I've worked with 2 committees in Cambridge so far, and I mean sincerely that to a person, they have kept student interest at the heart of the work that they were doing. They've been thoughtful. They have held our administration, both my own and the previous one, accountable. And I think they represented the community well. The individuals who have been elected, and I know them primarily through sort of like public engagements and interactions, but they, from my perspective, represent a group of people who genuinely and sincerely want the schools to be places that are focused on kids and are functioning at a level that the community should take pride in. And as a former school committee chair myself, I would say that I really respect and appreciate that, and I'm grateful to them for their willingness to serve, and I look forward to collaborating with them to try to do what I have every reason to believe are shared values and shared goals of improving the lives of kids.
Thank you. I just want to mention 2 things. I want to first thank your team, thank everyone who came out today. I want to bring up our friend Frank. He's going to close us out. Often kind of gives us an ancestral prayer when we do these events. I will say is this as well in terms of it's been a pleasure to be a part of today's conversation. The gift and the curse is that everyone in Cambridge has a lot of ideas, and so we also keep in mind we dealing with a cold. But I just want to thank you for sticking around, sticking through it, and allowing myself and Ty the grace just to ask you questions.
Oh, thank you.
And not to, kind of have these working groups. So I want to thank you, and thank you to your team and Lily and my buddy in the back, and you guys are really great. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you. Before I go on, Superintendent Murphy, I've been a long life Cambridgian for all my life, and I worked in the city of Cambridge for over 28 years, working with youth and adolescents. And now I'm glad I'm part of one of the co-founders with Ty and Tony with MBK. One of my frustrations over the weekend, I did a lot of reading and a lot of research, because it really disheartened me 2 weeks ago, yesterday, when I heard the scores, particularly with regard to Black children. And what frustrated me is that everyone talked about the system. Even you said the system. But if we're going to have an honest discourse, we have to say, what is the system? Is it the piping system? Is it the heating system? No, it's the racial system. And I think our children feel that and know that. When Rachel Weinstein said something, and I quote, she says, what is most troubling, statistics from 2024-25 MCAS data. She also said, and I quote, it is our Black students who, time and time again, the gap is getting worse, unquote. Vice Chairman Carolyn Hunter called it very disturbing, quote, very disturbing. Over the weekend, I had read 2 books that helped me put this in perspective. The first one is this by Dr. Edwin Deming. Dr. Edwin Deming wrote a book called Leadership Principles from the Father of Quality. When it comes to data, he says, in God we trust, all others must bring data. Author Glenn E. Singleton wrote a book called Time to Act, Close the Racial Achievement Gap. And he said, systems don't change without below-the-line information. Revolutionaries carry it. Talking about the systemic racism and systems that refuse to address race, that's below-the-line truth. And finally, Albert Einstein said, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we use when we create them. So personally, I welcome the new school committee members and look forward to addressing the educational malpractice in some of our 17 schools. Now I will recite my MBK ancestral prayers. Well, I'm sorry, and one challenge, I will challenge the school committee and city council members. I know Mark McGovern, a lot of them do come to MBK's seminars when we have our young adults. And we appreciate this to see how they've been helpful in the city hall. But I would add for the new school committee members, in the old ones, come by to see what Ty and Tony's doing with our youth. When they talk about data, those data is Kwame, Shaquila, people who are disenfranchised and marginalized. Come see and hear what they say after they get out of graduate from the Cambridge High School, and see not only the strength, the energy, the transformation that we help shape them. And I always say to them as a former therapist, nothing is wrong with you. Something happened to you. It's in the educational malpractice that you had for 12 years. We need to start changing this and be honest, the dialogue about it. Those students that are failing now, those Black students that are failing now, what do we say to them? How do we make that whole? How do we say to the parents who English as a second language that they can't go to the school and feel comfortable and talk about their son or daughter's IEP? You know, every Tuesday we listen to the 2-minute conversation or 3-minute conversation. There's no sign interpreters, sign language interpreters there. There's no people who want to speak that speak a foreign language to speak on their behalf. What do we? How do we marginalize? How do we make that whole? So that's my pet peeve. So thank you for coming again. Now, our ancestral prayer that we use in our organization, and it goes like this. May we remember those who have gone before us. May we be inspired by their vision and valor. May their lives continue to remind us that service is more important than success, that people are more important than possessions. Principle is more important than power. May whatever we do be molded and shaped by honesty, excellence, and commitment. May our children carry forth with the pride, the nobility of history that are represented here, the various traditions in the room, the creator of all of us, by whatever name we may refer to the creator. We dedicate our lives to create our world more better and more beautiful. Thank you and good night. Ashe.